Welcome back to part 2 of chapter 12. Let's get into it. Alright, so last time we talked about Mecca. It was one of the cities you needed to know for your geography. And there's something called the 5 Pillars of Islam. And one of those 5 pillars is that you need to take a Hajj to Mecca. So I want you to remember the vocabulary word Hajj, okay? It means pilgrimage to Mecca. And that's what you're looking at here, okay? So let's watch a small video about this pilgrimage.
Mecca sits in the western mountains of Saudi Arabia, in a sanctuary roughly 100 miles square. Since long before Islam, it has been considered sacred territory, where no one could hunt, cut trees, or fight. At the heart of the city is a great mosque called Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and at its center is the Kaaba. Muslims don't worship the Kaaba. They worship what it represents, the one God. Hajj takes place in and around Mecca. It is a series of rituals performed between the 8th and 13th days of the last month of the Islamic calendar. While circling the Kaaba is the final act of the pilgrimage, it is also the top priority for pilgrims when they first get to Mecca. For Muslims who have prayed in this direction every day for years, seeing the Kaaba for the first time is almost overwhelming. Now to the Valley of Mina, where the Prophet Muhammad stopped and rested on his Hajj nearly 14 centuries ago. This is a town that grows from virtually 0 to 2 million people overnight. At dawn on the next day, the camps stir with anticipation for the greatest day of the Hajj. 2 million people are off to the plain of Arafat. Some 50,000 vehicles clog the roads. Arafat is 8 miles east of Mina. It's the place, Muslims believe, Adam and Eve found each other after exile from Eden. And it's seen by many as a rehearsal for the Day of Judgment.
It's Judgment Day. All the trappings of life sort of fall away and you see these people in front of God Almighty. And that's all there is.
A strange quiet descends in the afternoon as people turn inward. It's called the Standing at Arafat. Only when the sun has set can pilgrims leave Arafat. Nearly 2 million people stand poised to move as soon as the sun dips below the horizon. The pilgrims move back toward the white tents of Mina, where tomorrow they will engage in a symbolic battle with the devil. Here, Muslims believe, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, but the devil challenged him not to. One story says, Abraham pelted the devil with stones 3 separate times, chasing him away. 3 stone pillars mark the spots where Abraham stood his ground. At a place called Muzdalifah, on the way to the pillars, pilgrims pick up pebbles to stone Satan themselves. The ritual is called the Jumrat. With all other rites complete, pilgrims return to Mecca for a grand parting visit. They have all earned an honorific title, Haji for the men, Hajjah for the women. Pilgrims arrive alone in a current of 1 million strangers and go home riding a spiritual wave of rebirth.
All right, so today we're going to talk about the spread of Islam. And it's a little bit complicated, but make sure you understand the Sunni-Shia split, okay? That is big deal, little deal, no deal, huge deal, okay? So let's talk about it. When it comes to the empires, just know that there's a bunch of them and try to focus on how we get to the Ottoman Empire. I'm not going to ask you too many specifics so that you don't have to worry about that. And then do focus on the cultural achievements. So we have something called Hindu-Arabic numerals. What are those? Okay, make sure you know what that is. And then it's kind of cool, Sufism. We'll talk about that as well. So how does Islam spread? Through trade and warfare. Make sure you understand the difference, and we'll talk about it. What is the Sunni-Shia split? It's a division over Muhammad's successor. So once Muhammad passes away, who's going to take over? We'll talk about it. And then what are some Islamic achievements? And there's a bunch of them. I have algebra here, but you can also think of Hindu-Arabic numerals. All right, so real quick, we're going to do some geography. Right here, we've got this sea. What's that called? The Red Sea. And then where's the Persian Gulf? Can you find it on this map? Right over here, Persian Gulf. And then where's the Mediterranean Sea? Right here, okay? Very good. And then where's Saudi Arabia? I'm going to switch to orange right here. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. There's Iraq. There's Iran. All right, so make sure you're studying your geography and make sure you get that right. Thank you. Okay, here's where's Mecca and Medina. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. So Caliph means successor. And we're not talking about who's going to be. Remember Muhammad, something's different about him than other religious figures. He's both the political leader and the religious leader. So when it comes to the religious successor, no one's talking about that. He is kind of a, one and then there's no more. But when it comes to political leader, who's going to be the general? Who's going to be the governor? Okay, that's what we're talking about. Who's going to take over? And so is it going to be Abu Bakr, who is Muhammad's father-in-law, or is it going to be Ali, who is Muhammad's son-in-law? And that is going to be a big split. We'll talk about it more in just a minute. So after the death of Muhammad, I want you to check this out. They're over here in the Saudi Arabia, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and then they're going to spread up. And so Persia was fighting with the old Eastern Roman Empire. Do you remember what they were called? The Byzantine Empire. And so Persia and the Byzantine Empire, they're fighting for like 300 years. They're pretty tired. And then out of that, the Islamic Revolution, or I guess that's maybe not the best word for it, but they're going to come up and then they're going to spread into those empires. Okay, so the Shia, they designate Ali, who is Muhammad's son-in-law. And what's the difference between the Shia and the Sunni? The Sunni designated Abu Bakr. Okay, they said Muhammad didn't leave a successor, it should be Abu Bakr.
So, like, a really long time ago, like 22 AD, this guy named Mohammed founded a religion and moved here. He becomes, like, super awesome leader, dude, who gets, like, super awesome messages from God. So, Muhammad, like, runs all these people in this tribe, and he's like, hey, yo, I'm gonna need a right-hand man. So he works with Abu Bakr, who's, like, his father-in-law, but then later on, Muhammad's kids get married, and now the prophet has a son-in-law. This dude, Ali, now Muhammad, or Muhammad Ali, becomes like the next closest male relative. So eventually Muhammad dies, and everyone's like, who's going to be the new leader? Vote now! But just like the election of 2016, your vote doesn't matter anything. Abu Bakr holds a super secret meeting to choose the next leader, and Ali's all like, wanna be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. But surprise, Abu Bakr wins! Yay! Wait, did I say yay? I meant no. People get like wicked salty about this, and it like divides the whole place. Sunnis are all like, chill, you lost, get over it. Shiites are like, this election was rigged. That joke was a lot funnier a month ago. But Ali becomes leader later, but people still get mad that he wasn't like the first choice, that he was like the second choice. So Muhammad grandkids are hanging around, and all these kids are like, yo, these Sunnis are corrupt. I love fight them. It gets them killed. So now people are like wicked mad, and each group is like, you're the worst. Nuh-uh, you are. No, you. Liar. And they like go their separate ways, but each are holding their our religion divided first before the Catholics did card. But over time, Islam makes like the CW and gets so many spin-offs. And there's like different schools of thought and different groups. There's Twelvers, Hanabali, Hafi, Safi, Makali, and Wasabi. Wait, maybe not that last one. But the Sunni branch just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing and growing until like 80% of all Muslims are Sunni. But that still doesn't mean things are chill. Things are not chill. Each group believes different things. Like, Sunnis value God's input on the real world, whereas Shiites are like real big fans of sacrifice and martyrdom. So Iran, but like Iran the country, is Shiite, but other countries like Saudi Arabia are Sunni, and the Sunnis are mad at the Shiites for doing the religion their way and not supporting them in wars. And Sunnis are like, you're not Muslim. And Shiites are like, yes, I am. And they're like, nuh-uh. And then they're like, uh-huh. But they used to exist like oil and water. Now it's more like, and you get a gun, and you get a gun, and you get a gun, and everyone gets a gun. Because armed combatants are now all the rage. Thanks to, wait for it, Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. Hate and division? Leading to extremists? That doesn't sound familiar at all. So Sunnis and Shiites are like the Sox and the Yankees. The World Series actually impacted the rest of the world, causing international incidents, and was played with AK-47s instead of bats. But recently, ISIS has made it a lot more of a problem, and just now everything's a hot mess over there, so bye!
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. It talks about the Sunni-Shia split, okay? And so look here at Iraq versus Iran. They're going to fight each other, and they're not fighting over that per se, but it's just, this is the root, and as time goes on, they grow apart, okay? And then they're still fighting to this day. Here's one of the possible solutions for Iraq. You notice they would separate it into Sunni and Shia, and then the Kurds up in the north. It just shows that, you know, it's tough sometimes to blend them together. Here's what it looks like. You can see that Sunni Islam dominates the Middle East, but Iran is a very powerful country, and they are primarily Shiite. And I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little longer now, where there were some missiles exchanged and there was some hostilities. They didn't escalate, thankfully. But I just want you to see the potential for conflict. Why does Iran and Saudi Arabia? I thought, if they're both Islamic, you would think they'd get along more, but they don't. Why? Oh, okay. It goes all the way back to this Sunni-Shia split. And I'm definitely kind of, boiling it down and keeping it simple. But, there's more to it, is what I'm trying to say.
The terms Sunnis and Shiites get thrown around a lot when discussing Middle Eastern conflicts. And sometimes it's useful, but most of the time it feels like it's just shorthand for these people hate each other. But with over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, there's no way they can all be involved in some Hatfields and McCoy-style blood feud. So what's really going on here? Well, first of all, not all Sunnis and Shiites are at war with each other. There are tons of places where they coexist peacefully, like the United Arab Emirates, or Dearborn, Michigan, for example. It's also worth noting that their religions aren't diametrically opposed. In fact, the Sunni-Shiite conflict isn't even really about religion, it's about power. Originally, Muslims were all one group, unified under the Prophet Muhammad. Then, in the year 632, Muhammad died, and Muslims split off into two separate groups. The Sunnis wanted Muhammad's successor to be chosen by his community of followers, while the Shiites wanted the leadership to stay within the Prophet's family. The Sunnis were in the majority, so they chose their new leader to be the Caliph, which is basically the head of state. The Shiites did not recognize this new leader, and instead, they chose Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, as their new imam, which also basically means head of state. That was the main source of divide, and from there, things really only got worse. Early on, most of the Shiite imams met violent ends at the hands of the stronger Sunni caliphs, including Imam Ali's son, Hussein, whose beheading is still considered a major holiday for Shiite Muslims. Today, there are numerous Sunni and Shiite militant groups, terrorist organizations, and oppressive governments. Being Sunni or Shiite doesn't necessarily make you a member or even a supporter of those groups, but they're still divided up that way. In fact, every nation with Sunni-Shiite conflicts has large militant groups on both sides, and they all have a history of oppressing one another depending on who's currently in power. Iraq, for example, was run by an oppressive Shiite regime before Saddam, then an oppressive Sunni regime under Saddam, followed by an oppressive Shiite regime once again after Saddam left power. Now the oppressive Sunni militant group ISIS is threatening to take over huge parts of the country. So you can see that the Sunni-Shiite conflicts are more about power, politics, and retribution than actual religion. And truthfully, the words Sunni and Shiite aren't even the best words to use when discussing Sunni-Shiite conflicts. They are way too general. If you're talking about militant jihadists or terrorist networks, but what you really mean is ISIS or Al-Qaeda, just say ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Otherwise, you're including billions of people who aren't even involved and most likely don't.
All right, so like we were talking about, there's a split. Abu Bakr, he's going to lead for 2 years. He expands the empire over, or I shouldn't say expands the empire, expands Muslim influence over Saudi Arabia. Okay, so there's two ideas I want you to get from this slide. When you have trade, you're trading goods and sometimes services, but you're trading goods. You're also trading ideas, okay? So we talked about this with their caravans and their connection to Europe and Asia. The Middle East is centrally located. They're going to facilitate trade, and as they do this, they're going to spread ideas, all right? So that is one reason why this religion will spread so quickly. The other reason is warfare. They will fight and convert people. We talked about the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, and they're sort of worn down, and they're going to come in and get them both basically and expand all across the region till they get to Spain. Worth noting, after the Spanish defeat the Moors, they'll send out people. Those people are explorers and conquistadors. The most famous one is Columbus. Okay, so the battle, this is called the Battle of Tours, and this is where the Muslim expansion is stopped before they get into Europe. But you can look how much area they conquered, quite a bit. Most of the southern area of the Roman Empire, or the northern area of Africa, however you want to define it, most of the Persian Empire, and then all the way up into Spain. Okay, Battle of Tours. It's just an important battle. All right, so here are, don't try to write every word down. Here are the different empires that they want you to know about. One of the more important parts is they charge a tax for other religions. So they don't really care what religion you are, but you just have to pay more if you're going to be a different religion. And so it's not that extreme. We see Constantinople on this map, which is going to become Istanbul. And also I want you to notice that this Ottoman Empire, which pretty much inhabits all of Turkey, that's going to be around for quite a while. Okay, little vocab word, Janissaries. They're the slave soldiers. They would conquer, so they might conquer a Christian town. You have these little boys. What do we do with them? They would take them and they would turn them into soldiers. Okay, let's talk about some Muslim achievements. They proved that the moon affects ocean tides. Okay, they're responsible for Hindu Arabic numerals. I want you to remember what those are. You might remember them from, I think it was like Unit 2 or 3, when we were in India and the Indus Valley. Okay, they're the numbers we use today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, they combined Greek and Hindu concepts and they spread it around the world. Again, when you spread items and you trade, you also spread ideas. Look at this name. Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce it. Muhammad Musa al-Khwarizmi. Hopefully I pronounced that right. But he writes a book called Algebra. Boom, algebra. Yeah, you love it. All right. So that's where we get algebra from. So super smart dudes spreading super smart knowledge. Awesome stuff.
To much of the world, he was known by his Latin nickname algorithmi, which became the origin of the word algorithm. He pioneered a method for solving problems called algebra, today known as algebra. 1,200 years ago, he published the first atlas of the known world, wrote the first math textbook, and was calculating the movement of celestial bodies when Europeans were basically staring up the sky through toilet paper tubes. His name was Abu Abdallah Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, but you could just call him al-Khwarizmi, the man who made possible the math we use today. Oh, also including all the numbers that we use. Though his most lasting legacy was introducing so-called Arabic numerals to much of the world, he wasn't an Arab. He was most likely Persian. Born in what is now Uzbekistan around 780, al-Khwarizmi first appears in historical records as an instructor at one of the great ancient Islamic learning institutions, Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Sounds kind of like a theme restaurant owned by celebrity nerds. The House of Wisdom was actually a crossroads of the great civilizations of the ancient world: Babylon, Greek, Hindu, Arabic, Persian, and al-Khwarizmi liked to wet his beak in the knowledge that each had to offer. He studied the ambitious math of the Greek scientist Ptolemy, for example, who had tried to measure the world. But Al-Khwarizmi discovered that Ptolemy's calculations were wrong, so he corrected and reorganized all the data. With new coordinates and the help of some 70 geographers under his direction, he compiled a book called The Face of the Earth, a complete explanation of the geography and cartography of the known world thought to be the first of its kind. He was also the official astronomer of the court in Baghdad, and as part of his duties, he compiled charts that tracked the moon and 5 planets. These tables turned out to be so useful and accurate that centuries later they would be translated into Latin and Chinese and circulated around the world. But his real passion was for mathematics, and he eagerly accepted a commission from Muslim leaders to come up with a text for the general public about how to do basic calculations, like for conducting trade and making measurements. The result was a text with the inimitable name, The Compendious Book on Calculation by Completion and Balancing. In it, Al-Khwarizmi explains how to solve linear equations and quadratic equations with what he called al-jabr, or completion, by subtracting or dividing an amount from both sides to find a missing figure. You know, solving for x. It's not that he invented algebra, though he certainly refined our understanding of it. Instead, he codified knowledge from a whole bunch of different traditions, especially Greek and Indian, to make life easier for the 9th century equivalent of English majors everywhere. In this regard, by far his most lasting achievement came from his study of ancient Indian texts. In 825, he published On the Calculation with Hindu Numerals, where he described everything he learned about Hindu mathematics. It was a weird system, with digits from 0, which meant like nothing, to 9, and it used decimal places to denote increments of tenths, hundredths, and so on. The book didn't exactly fly off the shelves of the Baghdad Barnes & Noble, but it would turn out to be one of the most influential books in history. Because 300 years later, a copy of it was discovered by an English monk who, fascinated with Muslim scholarship, translated the research of Al-Khwarizmi, now called algorithmi, into Latin. Soon, Europe's scholarly elite was eating it up. The Hindu system was way easier and more intuitive than Roman numerals, which used a base 10 for counting and a base 12 for fractions, and had no concept of 0. Men of science began advocating for the use of what became known as Arabic numerals, chief among them Italian mathematician Fibonacci, who wrote a whole book about them in 1202. But of course, medieval Europe, it wasn't really all about the new ideas with all the burning people at stakes in the Inquisitioning. In 1299, the city of Florence, Italy actually passed a law forbidding the use of the numerals, not because of some anti-Muslim bias, but because Arabic numerals were just too easy to change. You could make a 6 into an 8, or throw a couple zeros after something and make a big profit with just a flick of the quill. It wasn't until the 1500s that the numbers began to take hold among merchants as well as scholars, but by that time, Al-Khwarizmi was forgotten to history. Which is why we still call the numbers that the whole world uses today Arabic numerals, despite the fact that the guy we have to thank for them wasn't Arab, and the numbers themselves were Hindu. Thanks for watching this episode of
All right, so hope you enjoyed that video about numbers. We're getting to the last kind of parts of this lesson: Sufism, mystical Islam. All right, so here are my favorite Sufis, the whirling dervishes.
In March 2016, India hosted its first ever World Sufi Forum. During the event, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi praised Sufism as Islam's greatest gift, and suggested that the faith was an alternative to more political extremist interpretations of the religion, akin to groups like the Islamic State. So, what exactly is Sufism? Well, Sufism is not a branch of Islam, like Sunni or Shia, nor is it a sect or denomination. Rather, Sufism is the spiritual and mystical philosophy of Islam. It's focused on a direct connection to God by foregoing material goods and relationships. Not unlike Christian monks or other ascetic groups, Sufis dedicate themselves to Allah through meditation, repetitive prayer, and non-violence. But while the concepts of Sufism are inherent in all versions of Islam, practitioners who wholly dedicate themselves to spirituality are called Sufis. Sufism arose less than a century after the founding of Islam. At the time, many Muslims were concerned with the religion's increasing materialism, which they believed would interfere with a spiritual connection with God. The word Sufi is an Arabic term for mystic, which itself was derived from suf, or wool. Sufis have historically worn wool as rejection of worldly clothing. By about the 11th century, Sufism had adopted a system of fraternal groupings, called orders. In these spiritual schools, leaders taught their followers the principles and rituals of Sufism, which included writing books and poems and reciting hymns. In fact, the 13th century is known as the Golden Age of Sufism. as the greatest mystical Islamic art and literature is believed to have derived from this period. By the 16th century, Sufism was deeply ingrained in both Sunni and Shia Islam, and had spread throughout Persia, India, and Central Asia. The most well-known symbol of Sufism is the whirling dervishes, a Sufi order that originated in 14th century Turkey. It's known for its repetitive spinning dances that unite the follower with God, and is a popular tourist attraction in Turkey. Today, Sufis can still be found all around the world. But according to the Pew Research Center, the belief system is most common in sub-Saharan Africa, where about 35% of Muslims in the region are said to belong to a Sufi order. Sufism is also prevalent among Muslims in India, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. Sufism has seen a resurgence in popularity as a direct alternative to the growing radicalization of Islam. Sufis have a legacy of philanthropy and missionary work, and are known for their nonviolence, tolerance, and personal sacrifice. During the Sufi Forum in India, Prime Minister Modi said, "At a time when the dark shadow of violence is becoming longer, you are the Noor, or the light of hope." Modi reportedly hopes to make India the center of what he calls the world Sufi movement, or the large-scale effort to use Sufism as a cure for jihadist extremism. World leaders have made similar efforts in the past in countries like the United Kingdom and the United States. But whether the ascetic, nonviolent practices in Sufism can overcome the spread of radical Islam is yet to be